Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on in the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let's first look back using keywords. For the first time since the Ukraine war broke out, South Korea hinted at the possibility of providing military aid to the war-torn country. Russia immediately warned that any arms for Ukraine would be considered an act of hostility towards Russia. The United States' list of electric vehicle models that will be eligible for tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act does not include South Korea's Hyundai or Kia. Our weekly focus analyzes how the short-term challenge could actually be an opportunity for long-term returns. The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. are scheduled for talks in Washington, D.C. next week. What can we expect from the Yoon-Biden summit? We take a sneak peek at major items on the table. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said this week assistance to Ukraine may be broadened beyond humanitarian or financial aid should there be a large-scale civilian attack. Russia warned any arms delivery to Ukraine could affect the Kremlin's position on the Korean Peninsula's security environment. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
It's an obvious answer to a purely hypothetical question. South Korea's top office says the country's policy of sending aid to Ukraine depends on Russia's actions and the scale of impact on citizens, with the war now having raged on for over 13 months. This comes after the Kremlin on Thursday warned any arms delivery to Ukraine is a hostile act and could endanger bilateral relations with Moscow in an angry response to President Yoon Suk-yeol's interview that hinted South Korea may broaden its support to Kyiv upon serious large-scale war atrocities. A senior official at Yoon's office addressed Moscow's reaction, telling reporters that the president had made a principled common-sense remark based on a hypothetical scenario. Thus, to flip the question, he said, Seoul's assistance to Ukraine would rest on Moscow's future actions, stressing the government has not changed its policy of sending only humanitarian and financial aid to Ukraine. The official highlighted how Yoon has said Seoul will take appropriate measures whilst considering relations with Moscow and the scale of harm caused to civilians. Still, given South Korea's history of receiving international support after the 1950-53 Korean War, the official said the country is committed to endorsing the freedom of the Ukrainian people and helping rebuild their nation. Russian officials had also warned weapons aid to Ukraine could affect the Kremlin's position on the Korean Peninsula's security environment, with the former president suggesting Moscow sends advanced weapons to North Korea. Regarding Moscow and Beijing's reaction to Yoon's interview, where he also said Seoul opposes a forceful change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Yoon's official said South Korea and China will actively expand talks and cooperation based on mutual respect and reciprocity, if they keep to global norms and respect the rules of the international community, despite having different political systems. Russia cannot be an exception to such rules, the official added. Yoon's office says South Korea has been providing more active support to Kyiv compared to last year and consulting with the United States, although the question of expanding aid is currently not on the table for the summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden in D.C. next week. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
In the meantime, though, U.S. has pledged to continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes and announced they plan to send an additional $325 million in assistance to Ukraine. The latest military assistance package is similar to previous weapons packages that include ammunition for howitzers and high-mobility artillery rocket systems, as well as other missiles and anti-tank ammunition. Also included in the aid package are anti-armor systems, small arms, logistics support vehicles, and maintenance support essential to strengthening Ukraine's defense. This round of aid will mark the 36th of its kind since the war began last year, with the total cost now surpassing $35 billion. Earlier this week, the U.S. Treasury Department shortened its list of electric vehicles eligible for tax credits in line with its Inflation Reduction Act. As widely expected, South Korean auto giants were not included in the list. But What does that mean? Joining me here in the studio is our trade correspondent, Shin-Young. Welcome, Hyung.
Great to be here, Tammy.
Hyung, first off, let's talk about the list itself. Which company is included and not included, and also the current state of global automakers, including the ones from South Korea.
Well, under the Act, 16 electric vehicle models are eligible for subsidies of up to $7,500. And that list has been whittled down from over 40 EV models after EV battery requirements got stricter, in addition to requirements that final assembly be done in North America. And all the selected models are American-made, including Tesla's Model 3 and Model Y, and Ford's E-Transit and Mustang. And as you just mentioned, Hyundai and Kia failed to put their name on the list. And although Hyundai's Genesis GV70 is manufactured at the company's Alabama plant, it was also excluded as its EV batteries are made in China. But they weren't the only ones. Companies from Japan and most of the firms in Germany were excluded from the list.
That's right, because on Thursday, Volkswagen was added to the list as the first foreign car for that bill. But for now, South Korea's exclusion from the list implies a loss of price competitiveness in the global auto market. Then what's the expected impact on local automakers?
Right, Diamond. This is concerning for South Korean firms as their U.S. counterparts will have a head start in the EV market. But some says that it is not the worst situation for South Korea. Rather, it could be seen as an opportunity as there are about 70 different EV models being sold in the U.S. and global automakers are now on the same page. Let's take a listen.
It's a good chance for South Korea, as global automakers now have to compete only based on the quality of their products. We have an advantage over global competitors, as South Korean electric cars have been recognized by the global market, with winning 3 awards this year.
Besides, he added that there are ways to minimize the damage by targeting the commercial vehicle market, such as through leased vehicles that are not subject to the U.S. EV bill. And in case of Hyundai Motor, it is accelerating the construction of its EV factory in Georgia, which will be completed in 2025. But uncertainty still lingers as the company will need to use the time between now and then to work on meeting the battery requirements.
Now, Hyung, speaking of the battery requirement, can you walk us through what that means and also its impact on local battery makers?
Well, the regulation, which was announced at the end of last month, includes details of critical minerals and components used in batteries. And to elaborate on that, if more than 50% of battery parts are manufactured and assembled in North America, a subsidy of $3,750 will be given. An additional subsidy of $3,750 is given when more than 40% of the key minerals are mined or processed in the U.S. or FTA countries. So in this case, South Korea is also one of those countries. The uncertainty has been greatly relieved as it's expected that local battery makers won't need to change their current manufacturing processes.
Since we don't have enough resources, we can't extract the major minerals for battery production. The latest requirements imply that even if South Korea processes those minerals, it can still qualify for tax credits. However, uncertainty still lingers as the details of tax incentives for automakers have not been announced yet.
And another uncertainty is that starting in 2025, an eligible EV may not contain any critical minerals extracted or processed by a foreign entity of concern. And more than 70% of the critical minerals used by South Korean battery firms like lithium are processed in China, which is expected to be on the list, causing South Korea to diversify its supply chain.
Then, with the Inflation Act emerging as a key agenda item at the Yoon-Biden summit next week, can we expect a breakthrough? What do you think?
Well, recently, Seoul's Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho met U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and requested that she pay attention to concerns that South Korea firms have about the bill. And such efforts are important as exports are crucial to South Korea's economy. And in fact, car exports account for more than 15% of total exports. And with the remaining issues in mind, the government may convey its concern and stance during the summit with President Biden. Let's take a listen.
It is important to secure a time extension until South Korea can reduce its dependence on Chinese minerals for batteries. It would also be great if the government could convey that there is a contradiction between the Inflation Reduction Act and the Free Trade Agreement, as it could amount to discrimination against a product manufactured outside the U.S.
While delivering concerns, it is also important to focus on positives, for instance, viewing the IRA as among measures to strengthen bilateral cooperation on the battery supply chain.
Meanwhile, more than 100 business leaders will be accompanying President Yoon on his trip to the U.S., and the Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs hinted at the possibility of addressing the Inflation Reduction Act if the two leaders feel the need for comprehensive cooperation measures.
Right. The talks on the act turn out to be fruitful, hopefully, so that they can ease the burden off of the local automakers.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today, Hayoung.
My pleasure.
But this week wasn't all bad for South Korea's Hyundai and Kia. The automakers led the country's record car exports in March. Increased demand for eco-friendly cars also played a role in the new record. Our Moon Hae-ryun tells us more.
South Korea's auto exports hit record highs once again in March. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday, the value of car exports came to over $6.5 billion, smashing the previous record of $5.6 billion set in February. This is a 48% rise compared to the same month last year. Production levels also reached a high unseen since 2017. Over 400,000 cars were produced in March for the first time in 6 years, after supplies of auto parts resumed following the reopening of China's borders. Of these 400,000 vehicles, some 260,000 were sold overseas, the largest number of units exported since December 2016. The ministry attributed this to more South Korean cars being eligible for tax credits under the United States Inflation Reduction Act, despite not being assembled in North America. This was reflected in the exports of eco-friendly cars, which recorded all-time highs in terms of both export value and vehicle units. Around 72,000 eco-friendly vehicles were sold overseas in March, an almost 80% increase compared to the previous year. The value of these exports came to some $2.3 billion, an almost 95% increase on year. The export of electric vehicles saw the highest rise in numbers on year, rising by over 100%, followed by hybrid and hydrogen cars. Domestic sales differed in that hydrogen-fueled vehicles saw the greatest rise in sales on year at 51.2%, followed by hybrid cars. Domestic sales were also boosted by the release of new models such as Hyundai Motors' new Grandeur and Kia's new Niro. The most popular model in South Korea was Hyundai Motors' Grandeur GN7, selling over 10,000 units in March. Meanwhile, exports of vehicle components fell on year by 5.3%, coming to just over $2 billion. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
We're just a few days away from the Yoon-Biden summit. President Yoon Suk-yeol jets off to Washington, D.C. on Monday. Here's his itinerary for the next week.
President Yoon Suk-yeol jets off to Washington, D.C. next Monday for a state visit hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden. This is the first state visit by a sitting South Korean president in 12 years, and according to the first deputy director of the National Security Office on Thursday, the two presidents are set to meet on multiple occasions.
President Yoon and President Biden will spend a long time together through multiple events, including the White House's official welcoming ceremony, the summit, and state dinner, and will congratulate each other for the success of the bilateral alliance of 70 years and exchange views of its future advancement.
Yoon's schedule so far shows that the summit will not be the first time the two meet, as Biden has invited Yoon for a reception on Tuesday evening, the day before Wednesday's summit. On Thursday, Yoon will address Congress on liberal democracy and share his blueprint for the future of the bilateral alliance. The speech will be followed by lunch at the State Department, hosted by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and State Secretary Antony Blinken. A briefing by top U.S. military officials on the global situation is also to take place on that day. Before returning to Seoul, he'll stop by Boston to meet academics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology while also hosting a panel session at Harvard University's Kennedy School on Economic Freedom and Liberal Democracy. The deputy director of the National Security Office says he expects the summit to ramp up the defense readiness of the two countries while further solidifying the extended deterrence. He added that economic security cooperation will strengthen, especially regarding supply chain issues. And lastly, the summit will set the basis for stronger support of exchanges among future generations from the two countries.
These are a few expected results from the summit, but the most important aspect is the reaffirming that the bilateral alliance's history and the present are based on the shared values of the two countries.
This will be the sixth time President Yoon meets President Biden since taking office last May, and it comes while there are a number of significant issues. Security issues regarding North Korea's increased missile provocations and the prolonged war in Ukraine. Economic issues regarding the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS and Science Act. While different results will come from the two leaders' talks, the most significant, according to an official at the presidential office, will be decided by the people. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
The upcoming summit between the two leaders of Seoul and Washington is expected to cement trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, as the three sides share and pursue many common interests and concerns, namely maintaining regional security against North Korean threats. Then what now for Seoul as relations between North Korea, China, and Russia also tighten? Let's turn to our foreign affairs correspondent, Choi Min-jung.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's upcoming trip to the United States will mark a historical opportunity for the Seoul-Washington alliance. But many would also agree that the summit could spur an even stronger trilateral relationship between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The three countries have already begun strengthening military cooperation through three-way exercises aimed at countering North Korea's growing threats. The leaders are also expected to meet on the sidelines of the G7 Hiroshima summit in May. The recent boost in trilateral cooperation is partly thanks to improved Seoul-Tokyo ties, and following on from next week's summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden, cooperation between the three countries is expected to accelerate even further. While the allies are on track to strengthening ties, an ever closer relationship is also being witnessed between North Korea, China, and Russia. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Russia last month and voiced opposition to sanctions and pressure on Pyongyang. China and Russia, which are both veto-wielding members of the UN Security Council, have continuously blocked the UNSC from imposing additional sanctions on North Korea in response to its unprecedented level of provocations. On top of North Korean issues, the rivalry between the two groups could be further intensified with issues ongoing in Ukraine and Taiwan. Then what stance should South Korea take amid such heightened competition?
Our foreign policy priority should be to protect and to promote that international order. So that means our foreign policy decision is not between the US and China. It's not how we can balance the relationship between China and the United States. If that is the question, there is no answer. But if the question is, do we have to do more to protect the rules-based liberal international order? I think the answer is yes, and that should be our foreign policy guideline.
The expert explained that South Korea has been able to prosper over the past 4 decades thanks to a favorable global environment based on rules-based liberal international order. He made clear that South Korea's foreign policy priorities should, therefore, be directed at protecting and promoting international order rather than choosing which side to take between the two superpowers. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Yoon-Biden talks will likely include Washington's extended deterrence for Seoul. Now, the question is, will there be a joint statement on the nuclear umbrella referring to the U.S. obligation to help in the event of an attack? Our Peunji talked to some experts.
Nuclear sharing is a concept in NATO's policy of nuclear deterrence that allows non-nuclear weapon member states to participate in planning for the use of nuclear weapons. There's the possibility that the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. may discuss this idea of nuclear sharing during their summit as they work to better respond to North Korea's provocations.
The summit will be an opportunity for the two countries to strengthen combined defense readiness and build extended deterrence.
In a recent interview with Reuters, President Yoon Suk-yeol said he will seek, quote, tangible outcomes on Washington's efforts to improve responses to counter evolving threats from North Korea. He added that he thinks even stronger measures than what NATO has should be prepared in order to respond to a powerful nuclear attack. An expert explained that the president seems to have implied a nuclear sharing system between South Korea and the U.S. that's beyond just giving advice to the U.S. government, unlike NATO, where the member states can only advise the U.S. commanding authorities about nuclear planning and nuclear use.
So this could mean that the South Korea could give more input to the U.S. government when it comes to actual targeting, and then even when it comes to the decision to use those weapons.
Nuclear sharing between the allies will mean deploying U.S. tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea or near South Korean territory and conducting joint planning and joint operation of them. This could possibly lead to the idea of creating a new nuclear planning group in Asia involving the U.S., Japan, and Australia that can act as a global body on nuclear matters and discuss policy issues on nuclear forces. But the public opinion in Japan still remains highly anti-nuclear, making it difficult for the country to join this type of international group.
It's probably more realistic to have some sort of a bilateral arrangement between South Korea and the United States first, and perhaps other countries can join this arrangement down the road. So what's likely is that Australia is likely to join such a nuclear planning group before Japan does.
For now, the concept of creating a new nuclear planning group remains hypothetical, but the upcoming summit will definitely act as an opportunity for the allies to find more effective ways to deter nuclear threats from North Korea. 배은지, Arirang News.
그래서 저희가 그 전국에 국가 지정 입원 치료 병상을 준비해서 운영을 하고 있습니다. 이후 환자의 발생 추이에 맞춰서 저희가 지속적으로 조정해 나갈 예정입니다.
네.
Last but not least, K-pop girl group 50/50 has made it onto the Billboard charts just 4 months after their debut. Now, that's the shortest time ever in K-pop history. And the fact that they're not from one of those big entertainment firms is also noteworthy. They joined K-pop stars like BTS, Psy, Blackpink, and NewJeans in being recognized on the American music charts. The first single, Cupid, has climbed to number 60 on Billboard's latest Hot 100. The song first went viral on the back of short-form video content on social media, but the mix of chilled, easy listening and romantic vibes in the song appears to have made it stand out.
I think we've gotten more attention on the back of TikTok, but I think essentially it's the music.
Many have told us that our music is good. We're really thankful and we realize that we're a group with great musicality.
Now, normally the climax of a song is used and enjoyed for those short-form videos, but for Cupid, the beginning of the song has stolen many listeners' hearts due to its uniqueness and a soft melody.
Songs become hit songs due to delicate psychological factors combined with emotional aspects. Not just big entertainment firms have capabilities. These kinds of creativity can surely be developed and flourish.
In fact, the rise of such a K-pop group and their song is nothing shocking, according to this music critic.
We all believe K-pop has become successful in South Korea and should make it in overseas markets. But in fact, K-pop is more heard and already widely enjoyed abroad.
So no matter where the groups come from, K-pop has proved itself to be pleasant and enjoyable to listen to globally. That is all we have for this weekend's Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.